Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. Serpa again. I am going to read another 3 chapters of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane today. But before I get started, I want to tell you something super cool. I have ordered another copy of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. And if you comment on any of the Edward Tulane videos, maybe just say if you like the story, what was your favorite part. If you make a comment of any kind on any of the Edward Tulane videos, you have a chance to win your own copy of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Also, since you're going to be using a lot of cell phones looking at videos to learn right now, I also have these little piggy things that stick on your tabletop or your desk or wherever it is that you're watching the videos, and you can prop a cell phone up on it. So I'll send a couple of those to you as well. Kennedy's going to come around and demonstrate how her cell phone, so you lean it right up there, you stick the piggy down, it's like a suction cup, and you push it down and you can lean your cell phone up on it so you can watch the video. All right? And I told you last time that Bailey and Loki were going to join us. Loki, I don't know where he is right now. He may come back out in a little bit, but Bailey is definitely here to join us right now while we read chapter 4. Oh, Loki, come here. Come here, bud. Everyone wants to meet you. Come on. Come here. Oh, this is Loki. Turn around. Up. He's laying down. So maybe if he stands up, you'll see him. Oh, there he is. So, anyways, I am going to read 3 more chapters of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Okay? And we're going to think about the character traits. Now, just to do a quick summary of this story, because it's one of my favorite stories, Edward Tulane is a China rabbit. China is a delicate glass. And he belongs to a little girl named Abilene. He's like a toy rabbit. And Abilene treats Edward like he's a real live rabbit, and she dresses him in the best clothes, and he has the best things, and he has his own gold pocket watch. So he is a little full of himself. He just thinks he's the best rabbit around. He thinks he's very fantastic and fancy and that nobody is better than him. He kind of has a selfish personality, and maybe his character traits are a little greedy and self-absorbed. Okay? Now, that is the way that Edward is at the beginning of the story, but by the end of the story, he changes. Okay? So, by the end of the story, he is going to change, and his character trait will be different. He just turns into a different type of person. I'm going to put Bailey down right here. Okay? So, we are going to read chapters 4, 5, and 6. At the end of the last chapter, Abilene found out that her family was going on a cruise ship and they were taking a trip. Okay? And her grandmother, Pellegrina, was getting ready to tell a story about a beautiful princess. Okay? So, chapter 4. Once there was a princess who was very beautiful. She shone as bright as stars on a moonless night. But what difference did it make that she was beautiful? None. No difference. Why did it make no difference? Asked Abilene. Because, said Pellegrina, she was a princess who loved no one and cared nothing for love, even though there were many who loved her. At this point in her story, Pellegrina stopped and looked right at Edward. She stared deep into his painted-on eyes, and again, Edward felt a shiver go through him. So Pellegrina kind of knows that Edward is selfish inside, even though Edward's not really supposed to be alive. And so, said Pellegrina, still staring at Edward. What happened to the princess? Said Abilene. And so, said Pellegrina, turning back to Abilene, the king, her father, said that the princess must marry. And soon after this, a prince came from a neighboring kingdom, and he saw the princess, and immediately he loved her. He gave her a ring of pure gold. He placed it on her finger. He said these words to her, I love you. But do you know what the princess did? Abilene shook her head. She swallowed the ring. She took it from her finger and swallowed it. She said, "That is what I think of love." And she ran from the prince. She left the castle and went deep into the woods or the forest. And so what? Said Abilene. What happened then? And so the princess became lost in the woods. She wandered for many days. Finally, she came to a little house, and she knocked on the door. She said, "Let me in, I am cold." There was no answer. She knocked again. She said, "Let me in, I am hungry." A terrible voice answered her. The voice said, "Enter if you must." The beautiful princess entered, and she saw a witch sitting at a table counting pieces of gold. 3,622, said the witch. "I am lost," said the beautiful princess. "What of it?" said the witch. 3,623. "I am hungry," said the princess. "Not my concern," said the witch. 3,624. "But I am a beautiful princess," said the princess. 3,625, replied the witch. "My father," said the princess, "is a powerful king. You must help me or there will be consequences." "Consequences?" said the witch. She looked up from her gold. She stared at the princess. "You dare to talk to me of consequences? Very well then, we will speak of consequences. Tell me the name of the one you love." "Love?" said the princess. She stamped her foot. "Why must everyone always speak of love?" "Whom do you love?" said the witch. "You must tell me the name." "I love no one," said the princess proudly. "You disappoint me," said the witch. She raised her hand and said one word, "Farthfiggery." Here's a picture, before I move on, of Pellegrina telling Abilene the story, and Edward is sitting there tucked into bed listening. So I wonder what happens when she says Farthfiggery. If I can get the page turned, I will tell you. All right. And the beautiful princess was changed into a warthog. "What have you done to me?" squealed the princess. "Talk to me of consequences now, will you?" said the witch, and she went back to counting her pieces of gold. 3,626, said the witch, as the warthog princess ran from the hut and out again into the forest. And for those of you that don't know what a warthog is, it's a really ugly pig with big giant teeth, and it looks really gross and ugly. The king's men were in the forest too. And what were they looking for? A beautiful princess. And so, when they came upon an ugly warthog, they shot it immediately. Pow! "No," said Abilene. "Yes," said Pellegrina. The men took the warthog back to the castle, and the cook found, after he opened it up, he found a ring of pure gold inside the pig. There were many hungry people in the castle that night, and all of them were waiting to be fed. So the cook put the ring on her finger and finished butchering the warthog, and the ring that the beautiful princess had swallowed shone on the cook's hand as she did her work. The end. "The end," said Abilene indignantly. "Yes," said Pellegrina, "the end." "But it can't be." "Why can't it be?" "Because it came too quickly. Because no one is living happily ever after. That's why." "Ah, and so." Pellegrina nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "But answer me this. How can a story end happily if there is no love?" "But, well, it is late, and you must go to sleep, Abilene." Pellegrina took Edward from Abilene. She put him in his bed and pulled the sheet up to his whiskers. She leaned close to him. She whispered, "You disappoint me." After the old lady left, Edward lay in his small bed and stared up at the ceiling. The story, he thought, had been pointless. But then, most stories were. He thought of the princess and how she had become a warthog. How gruesome. How grotesque. What a terrible fate. Edward, said Abilene, I love you. I don't care how old I get. I will always love you. Yes, yes, thought Edward. He continued to stare up at the ceiling. He was agitated for some reason that he could not name. He wished that Pellegrina had put him on his side so that he might look at the stars. And then he remembered Pellegrina's description of the beautiful princess. She shone as bright as the stars on a moonless night. For some reason, Edward found comfort in these words, and he repeated them to himself. As bright as the stars on a moonless night, as bright as the stars on a moonless night, over and over until at last the first light of dawn appeared. So dawn is when the sun comes up in the morning. Now, boys and girls, when Pellegrina tells the story about the princess and how the princess doesn't love anyone, so she just became a warthog and nobody really cared about her and she thought love was pointless. She was actually kind of telling a story, and that symbolized Edward, because Edward feels the same way. Everybody loves Edward, but Edward could care less about anyone else, and he doesn't love anyone else. He thinks love is pointless because he just thinks he's so fantastic. He doesn't need love. So that story did have a point. Edward just didn't understand the point because he is the same as the princess. Okay? Chapter 5. This is a really short chapter. The house on Egypt Street became frantic with activity as the Tulane family prepared for their voyage to England. Edward possessed a small trunk, which is kind of like a suitcase, and Abilene packed it for him, filling it with his finest suits and several of his best hats, and 3 pairs of shoes, also that he might cut a fine figure in London. Before she placed each outfit in the trunk, she displayed them to him. So Abilene laid out all of his outfits so Edward could see them on the bed. Do you like this shirt with this suit? She asked him. Or would you like to wear your black derby? You look very handsome in it. Shall we pack it? And then, finally, on a bright Saturday morning in May, Edward and Abilene and Mr. and Mrs. Tulane were all on board the ship, standing at the railing. Pellegrina was at the dock. On her head, she wore a floppy hat strung around with flowers. She stared straight at Edward. Her dark eyes glowed. "Goodbye," Abilene shouted to her grandmother. "I love you." The ship pulled away from the dock. Pellegrina waved to Abilene. "Goodbye, lady," she called. "Goodbye." Edward felt something damp in his ears. Damp means wet. Abilene's tears, he supposed. He wished that she would not hold him so tight. To be clutched so fiercely often resulted in wrinkled clothing. Finally, all the people on land, including Pellegrina, disappeared. Edward, for one, was relieved to see the last of her. As was to be expected, Edward Tulane exacted much attention on board the ship, so everybody thought he was a fine rabbit. "What a singular rabbit," said an elderly lady with 3 strings of pearls wrapped around her neck. She bent down to look more closely at Edward. "Thank you," said Abilene. Several little girls on board gave Edward deep glances full of longing. They asked Abilene if they might hold him. "No," said Abilene. "I'm afraid that he's not the kind of rabbit who likes to be held by strangers." 2 young boys, brothers named Martin and Amos, took a particular interest in Edward. "What does he do?" Martin asked Abilene on their second day at sea. He pointed at Edward, who was sitting on a deck chair with his long legs stretched in front of him. "He doesn't do anything," said Abilene. "Does he wind up somewhere?" asked Amos. "No," said Abilene, "he does not wind up." "What's the point of him, then?" asked Martin. "The point is that he is Edward," said Abilene. "That's not much of a point," said Amos. "It's not," agreed Martin, and then, after a long, thoughtful pause, he said, "I wouldn't let anybody dress me like that." "Me neither," said Amos. Do his clothes come off? Asked Martin. Of course they do, said Abilene. He has many different outfits, and he has his own pajamas too. They are made of silk. Edward, as usual, was disregarding the conversation. He wasn't even listening. A breeze was blowing in off the sea, and the silk scarf wrapped around his neck billowed out behind him. On his head he wore a straw boater, which is a kind of hat. The rabbit was thinking that he must look quite dashing, which is the same thing as handsome. It came as a total surprise to him that when he was grabbed off the deck chair, and first his scarf and then his jacket and pants were ripped from his body, Edward saw his pocket watch hit the deck of the ship and roll merrily toward Abilene's feet. Look at him, said Martin. He's even got underwear. He held Edward aloft so that Amos could see. Take it off, shouted Amos. No, screamed Abilene. Martin removed Edward's underwear. Edward was paying attention now. He was mortified. Mortified, boys and girls, means embarrassed. He was completely naked except for the hat on his head, and the other passengers on board the ship were looking at him, directing curious and embarrassed glances his way. Give him to me, screamed Abilene. He's mine. No, said Amos to Martin. Give him to me. He clapped his hands together and then held them open. Toss him, he said. Please, cried Abilene, don't throw him. He's made of china. He'll break. Martin threw Edward, and Edward sailed naked through the air. Only a moment ago, the rabbit had thought that being naked in front of a shipload of strangers was the worst thing that could happen to him. But he was wrong. It was much worse being tossed in the same naked state, from the hands of one grubby, laughing boy to another. Amos caught Edward and held him up, displaying him triumphantly. Throw him back, called Martin. Amos raised his arm, but just as he was getting ready to throw Edward, Abilene tackled him, shoving her head into his stomach and upsetting the boy's aim. So it was that Edward did not go flying back into the dirty hands of Martin. Instead, Edward Tulane went overboard into the ocean. Uh-oh. This is his straw boater hat, boys and girls, that Edward Tulane was wearing. It has holes in the side for his rabbit ears. And we are going to read one more chapter, and then we will be done for the day. We're going to find out what is going on with Edward when he goes into the ocean. Remember, he's not a real rabbit. He's a toy rabbit. Okay? How does a China rabbit die? Can a China rabbit drown? Is my hat still on my head? These were the questions that Edward asked himself as he went sailing out over the blue sea. The sun was high in the sky, and from what seemed to be a very long way away, Edward heard Abilene call his name. Edward! She shouted. Come back! Come back? Of all the ridiculous things to shout, thought Edward, as he tumbled ears over tail through the air. He managed to catch one last glimpse of Abilene. She was standing on the deck of the ship, holding onto the railing with one hand. In her other hand was a lamp. No, it was a ball of fire. No, Edward realized it was his gold pocket watch that Abilene held in her hand. She was holding it up high, and it was reflecting the light from the sun. My pocket watch, he thought, I need that. And then Abilene disappeared from view, and the rabbit hit the water with such tremendous force that his hat blew off his head. That answers that question, thought Edward, as he watched the hat dance away on the wind. He sank and sank and sank. He kept his eyes open the whole time, not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. His eyes were painted on, and they witnessed the blue water turning to green and then to blue again. They watched as it finally became as black as night. Edward went down and down. He said to himself, if I am going to drown, Certainly, I would have done so by now. Far above him, the ocean liner, the ship, with Abilene aboard it, sailed blithely on, and the China Rabbit landed. Finally, on the ocean floor, face down, and there with his head in the muck, the mud and the sand on the bottom of the ocean, he experienced his first genuine and true emotion. Edward Tulane was afraid. He's never felt any emotions before, boys and girls, and he was afraid. I'm going to show you this one last picture. This is a picture of the ship that they were on after he got thrown overboard, and the ship is sailing away, and Edward is sinking deep into the ocean. All right, boys and girls, that is the next 3 chapters, chapters 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6, okay? We are going to, next time I'll go on to chapter 7, but remember, you could win a free copy of The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane and some little cell phone stands so you can watch your videos and stand up your cell phone, okay? So if you comment on this video or any of the Edward Tulane videos, then you would have a chance to win the book and I can ship it to you in the mail. So have a great day, boys and girls. I miss you.